This is the bread that came down from heaven. And those who grumbled said, hey, this is hard to believe. It is hard to believe. How many times have you heard or said, what are you complaining about? It's only an hour a week. I know you've said that. And you watch. But if we do that, we honestly misinterpret the purpose of Jesus' life. Because the Christian life should not be an escape for 1 hour a week into some otherworldly dimension or some otherworldly experience. To be called a disciple of Jesus, we are called to have a forming influence in this world 24/7. 1 week doesn't do it. 1 hour a week doesn't do it. 24/7, 52 weeks a year. And so what Jesus teaches us is that we have really 2 ways of having a forming influence in our world. The one way is a competitive way. A competitive way of life in which we ingest and which we consume the independence that so many of us love, the antagonisms in our relationships, the envy, the wars, the saying that winning isn't everything, it's the only thing, the urge to survive, the individualism, the contest that we have in the world over the resources, somehow the status that we just pride ourselves in, the conflicts and the destructiveness, the violence of our world. And we can ingest all of that. In fact, we do. Our children do. They hear it, they see it, and they live it. And that forms their attitudes. It becomes the bread of life that they feed on. And their life resembles that competitive way of life. Or we can ingest and we can feed on Jesus' way of life. And that way of life is not a competitive way of life. The Catholic Church or the Christian way of life is not in competition with the independence and the antagonism or that competitive way of life. The Christian way of life is an alternative way of life, an alternative way of living, and it's a search for excellence. A search for excellence in our world, in which we have cooperation and mutual love, where we look out for the well-being of others, where we're willing to sacrifice, literally sacrifice, and give our lives, that self-giving love that we are required to give each and every day. That cooperation brings about a communion, a common union of the values, the intentions, and the commitments of Jesus Christ. That is an alternative way of life. Sometimes we call it a beatitude way of life. Sometimes we call it the corporal works of mercy way of life. But it is an alternative to the competitiveness that is in our world. And so the Christian life is a continuing incarnation of Christ. I am the bread that came down from heaven. That's a continuing incarnation. But where does it take place? It takes place in you. It takes place in us. And so we either stand there as symbols of this competitiveness, or we stand there as symbols of this alternative way of life. And we have that forming influence in this world. This is hard to believe. Do you realize how difficult it is to get our children to understand that when we live in such a competitive way of life? Christ himself gives himself. Christ gives himself his food. And when we're feeding on Christ, when we're truly ingesting and consuming Jesus' way of life and allowing that what we consume and ingest to become part of us, just like food becomes part of us, we'll feel it in the gut. We'll feel it in our lives. We'll feel it through every ounce and every fabric of our being. His way of life is to be consumed. It's to be eaten and ingested. And so Christ becomes one with us. One with us. There's a solidarity with us and with each other. 24/7. 24/7. This is really, truly hard to believe. And yes, it's even harder to do. God bless you.